Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Lynda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy has a bachelor's degree from the University of Georgia and a master's degree from North Carolina State University. She works in private practice in Raleigh as a mental health therapist. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Friends, very excited today. Three things have put me in a very good mood. One of them is what we call the weather debate. So in our family, there's this big debate. What's the best season? And I'm very much outnumbered. So we all agree that winter is our worst season, all four of us. But that's where the agreement ends, because Anitra and Karis and Joy, they all say fall's their best season. And I am just completely indecisive. When I'm in the spring, I say it's spring. When I'm in the summer, I say it's summer. When I'm in the fall, I say it's fall. But I think I'm finally coming to the conclusion that spring is the best. And that's because in Georgia, we had 3 straight 80-degree days. And the flowers are booming or blooming. So our tulip garden has come and gone already. It started on February 26th and was gone by March 28th. But this week I planted an azalea garden, 30 azaleas, all different colors. And so the colors are flying out there in the backyard, and the weather is great. And I'm loving my favorite season, especially April and May. Another reason, I think I've shared this once before, but we get new listeners all the time. But the first time Anitra got pregnant, she had a miscarriage. Second time she had pregnant, it was really, really hard. Stillborn child, born at 38 weeks. 38 weeks, you'd hear no movement, feel no movement. You go in. I don't even remember the thought popping in my head that maybe the baby died. But I'll never forget the nurse telling us that the umbilical cord got strangled around his neck. And at 38 weeks, you got to go give birth to a dead baby. So that was really hard. And Anitra was like, I can only do this one more time. I can't do it anymore. The third time was the charm, because Karis was born on April 6th. So this is always a special time for me. Not only celebrating her birthday, but check this out. Anitra was born April 8th. Anitra got to walk out of a hospital in North Philadelphia on her birthday with a baby. And I don't know anybody who loves babies more than my wife. So that was amazing. In fact, anytime she's a little baby on TV, comes, look at the cute baby. So that was a really good thing this week. Celebration of a couple major birthdays and remembering just God's grace in our lives. And the third thing was the Andy Strickler Q&A. I thought it was fantastic. I got great feedback from everybody that was there. We had almost 90 people sign up. And that's families. So sometimes there's multiple people there, husband, wife, kid. And Andy's great. He was unfiltered. He was unguarded. He says things in public very few people say. And I'm going to ask Andy to do this again, but probably be 2 years from now, because we've got a lot of other people in the lineup. Afterward, Andy sent me an email, and I'll just read the first 5 words from the email. Dude, that was a ton of fun last night. So I just encourage you guys, sign up. Karen Christoph is up next. The sign-up sheet is up. It's been up for a few days. May 7th, 8:30 Eastern Time, 7:30 Central Time, 6:30 Mountain Time, 5:30 Pacific. We're going to stick with that time. That seems to be a good time for everybody. So it'll be different days of the week, but we're going to go for that 8:30 Eastern all the way down to 5:30 Pacific. That's going to be standard moving forward. I do want to let you know ahead of time what our next one's going to be. We got such a great response when Susan and I had our conversation about homeschool students and how things work for them in the admission process, that we're going to have a deep dive interview. And when I say we're going to have it, I've already conducted it. So it's coming up pretty soon in the rotation with two homeschool specialists, Holly Ramsey and Michelle Evard. They've written a book. They're considered two of the national leaders. In fact, I'm a member of IECA, and so are they. They lead the affinity group for homeschool families. That's a professional association for private college coaches. And then we have Liam Daly. Liam is a Beloit admission officer who specializes in homeschool students. All three of them are going to be on the interview, but they're also going to join us for a 1-hour Q&A. Now, you may say, wow, I'm not homeschooled, so how's this relate? A lot of our listeners are just intellectually curious on how this stuff works. So look for that sign-up sheet to go up. My goal is to get it up before next Monday's episode. It'll be either June or July. I'm hoping to nail that down this week. Friends, a lot of QFLs are coming in. Question for a listener. So much so to the point where at some point we're going to do just an entire QFL episode. Because I don't want you guys to send a question. You got to wait 6 months to get an answer. Sometimes it's seniors or juniors, or other times it's time sensitive. At the same time, our approach is to do a deep dive on everything. So at some point you run into a conflict. Well, how do you do a deep dive if you're getting, more questions than you can handle? Well, one approach is do a whole QFL episode. So look for that to happen in the next 2 months. Working on some of the details on that. And I'm going to give you a couple other previews of a few things that you can expect. This is announcements of what's to come episode. We got great feedback from my conversation with Vince on Thursday, where we just did a panoramic view of the different schools in the country and our experience with them. Look for me to do the same thing with Julia. Think you can enjoy that coming up shortly. And then also, Vince and I are going to do a special recording on the UCs. I don't know anybody who knows the UCs better than Vince. I mean, he was an admissions reader at UC Berkeley. He was an admissions reader at UCSD San Diego. He was an admissions reader for UCLA. And he's been living in California since the 80s, and he's been sending kids to all 9 of these schools on a regular basis. I mean, just the number of kids he sends to Berkeley every year is amazing. So I'm going to talk to Vince about the UCs. How are they different? Who is the kid you send to Santa Barbara? How's that different than the kid that you send to Irvine or to Davis or to Santa Cruz? I think it's going to be a great conversation. And Vince and I are actually recording that this week. And I'm just giving you a preview about some of the things that are coming up in up-and-coming episodes. And then another thing I think you're going to really like, we announced this about 6 months ago, but we're recording it in 12 days. And this is going to be a special recording with Hillary Dickman from Colorado College, Julia, Susan, and Vince. So 3 other leaders in the news team. And we're going to be discussing the activity section. This is a section juniors can do now. How do you fill out the activity section? What are missed opportunities? What are some mistakes? Hillary's literally been taking notes as she's read all year about things that stood out. Either way, stood out because they were noteworthy and they made a great impression, or missed opportunity. We're going to do a deep dive on the activity section, and I'm very excited about it. And so just giving you a few previews of some things that you can expect in the next few months on your college-bound kid. Don't know yet whether these are going to run on Mondays or Thursdays. Probably Thursdays, but stay tuned for more details. All right, for today, I had mentioned that I was going to share more things from the SACAC conference, but I also told you that we got to get to part 3, where Lisa is doing a breakdown for us on how to make a decision. You're looking at several schools. You're in 2, you're in 3, or you're in 8, and you're down to 2 or 3. How do you decide? And this is really part of a trilogy. You started out with Julia giving advice, then Susan giving advice. Lisa, the psychologist, is going to come at it from a resisting peer pressure perspective in your college decision. And then we'll have the final part of Lynda's interview with Marjorie Betley, Executive Director of STARS College Network. STARS is an acronym that stands for Small Town and Rural Students. So let's dive right in with my conversation with Lisa. Friends, I'm here with Lisa. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, how are you, Mark?
I'm excited. We've never done this. 3 different responses to one question, but we got such an amazing question. And for those of you who haven't heard the past episodes, I'll play the question now.
Hey Mark, this is Nishant. Thank you for everything that you and your team do. I had a question that I was hoping I could get your help on. We have been extremely blessed that my daughter has received admission to all the schools that she has applied to, other than one highly selective university. Her top 2 choices are ranked extremely high in the subject areas that she's looking to pursue. Question: how should I help her make a decision if all things are equal across the board? Thanks, Mark.
And so we recommend that you go back and listen to part 1. Julia did. That was on episode 402. And then part 2 was Susan's response, which was on episode 410. And now Lisa's going to answer the question, coming at it a lot from a mental health, from a psychology standpoint. And I'm sure there'll be some college counseling insights as well, because she's got both sides of her brain going there. And so I'm super intrigued because Lisa said I'm going to be surprised. And I feel like I know her pretty well. So I want to know what these surprises are. So fire away, Lisa.
Wait, no more. Well, it's hard because I feel like Julia and Susan gave such phenomenal responses. Like, what could I possibly add to those really phenomenal responses? And I really highly encourage people to listen to those because they're both amazing.
So let me say something about that. I originally was going to come behind and like throw in some of my own insights, but I'm like, Julia and Lisa and Susan, they got it. I don't need to do that. So I can understand how you feel that way.
So, I'm going to say ditto what they said on everything that they said. But I wanted to talk today a little bit about how we make decisions and sort of like using rational, logical means of making decisions and, sort of more emotional, intuitive, irrational ways of making decisions. And they're both valuable ways of making decisions, I think. A lot of times if we use our intuition, we use like mental shortcuts that we call heuristics, and those kind of can help us process things even more quickly than you would if you were just going through a logic tree and thinking your way through things. So they're both important. But I guess I just want to talk about some of the irrational or the emotional decision making and how that can be manipulated by peer pressure and by marketing from colleges, quite frankly. I know I talked about this in 2022, but there's a phenomenon. It's called brain shift. And that is like that many times in order to conform with a group, your brain will change your opinion or your assessment of a situation. And it's all done completely unconsciously. So you don't even know that it's happening. And they did this study where they took people, and some of them were actors, and they were presented with like solving problems, like how many squares are up on the screen, and they were kind of hooked up to a functional MRI machine, so you could see what was going on in their brain. And the actors would always give the wrong answer. They would all agree on it, like, oh, you'd see 2 squares. There are obviously 6 squares there, and so people would have 1 or 2 responses. A few of the people you could see in their MRI scan, they were upset. Their amygdala, which handles their emotions, like was firing, and they're like, I'm sorry, I only see 2. And it was very uncomfortable for them to go against the group. Other people, they're like, oh yeah, that's obviously 6. And when you ask them about it later, they're like, no, there were 6, because their brain just kind of made it to be 6. So they didn't have to argue with the group, and they could conform and they could fit in. And I think that's probably adaptive for human beings. Like, we obviously need to live in a society to survive. But, when it comes to college admissions and picking where you want to go to school, you have to be really, really careful, because think about all the messages that you are being given consciously and unconsciously by society. Number one, it's your peers, right? If you're a kid, what they think. Number two, it's the whole US News and World Report and this whole cultural, like delusion, I think about around what are good colleges and which ones are the best colleges and which ones that you should go to. And I think that people may not realize that they're absorbing that. They might think they're resisting it, but it's getting in your brain, even when
No, I think
you
it's
don't
totally true. And
intend.
I would also add parent messaging to that too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I was
Because
going to get
parents can,
there.
yeah, because I mean, it's hard for parents because the selectivity has changed so drastically since the 90s or the 80s that it's just super hard for people. So it's like little subtle things, right? It's like what visits you go on and little comments you make. But yeah, go ahead. This is fascinating.
So that is what I think, before you make a decision, I would really try to do some introspection about why you have the opinion that school X is more prestigious. Rather than sitting down and looking at the facts. Okay, does that school have the program that I want? Does that school have, like, how is that school in affordability? Where is the school located? Do I like the people who go there? Right. Because I think it's so easy to say, like, oh, I got into an Ivy, I'm obviously going to that one. End of decision. And
Yeah, and I wouldn't say more prestigious. I would say better for me because I think sometimes people can know this school is more prestigious than this one. It doesn't make it better for you.
oh, absolutely not. What I'm saying is, like, a person might be influenced by societies
Oh, yeah, yeah.
or
I
their
get it.
parents' perceptions of prestige
Sure.
or their opinions. So, and because, and I'm just going to talk about, like, I went on that college tour, and, one day we went to the University of Missouri, and the next day we went to Washington University. And, they both are great schools and they both have a lot of strengths, you know, but the price difference is quite
Mm-hmm.
profound. I mean,
Sure.
the highest anyone would ever pay at Mizzou is like their out of state tuition, which most people only pay for 1 year. And that's a cost of attendance of 42,000, right?
And I know that people might have missed that. Why don't you said most people pay for 1 year. Why don't you talk about the in-state option so people can follow that?
Sure. Most people only pay for 1 year of out of state tuition because Missouri has a policy that if you live there for a year, you work during the summer and you have a Missouri driver's license or, ID card, that you are then considered an in state resident. So it's like one of the easiest states for people to gain in state residency. And then your tuition goes down quite a bit for the remaining 3 years. So it can be really affordable. And obviously, if you're from Missouri, and many people
Sure.
from Missouri might consider these two choices, it's a very affordable option. So, and then I'm at Wash U the next day, which, is beautiful, right? I mean, castles everywhere. They have, like, the back 40, which is the freshman living area, which was designed by a Disney Imagineer. It looks like, a scene from the movie Beauty and the Beast. Like, I fully expected Belle to just be walking down the sidewalk singing. It's just that kind of magical thing. But it's $92,000 a year cost of attendance next year. And they do give out a lot of financial aid. So 65% of their students are getting some kind of need-based aid package. But, then there's 35% who are not, who are going to pay full freight. And that number just really kind of sat very heavily with me because that's a lot of money. I mean, that's,
Well, not only that, but I'm telling everybody schools on average have 3.5 to 5% increases. So if you're
exactly.
thinking about this for a 10th grade or 11th grade, project 6 years out, it's going to be 110
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're looking at, a minimum
after
of 400.
taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
$400,000 of your
Mhm.
family's resources going towards your student attending that school.
And remember, that might be 600,000 in earned income to get to the 400,000 after taxes. And you might have multiple kids and you might be thinking about grad school, med school, law school, professional schools. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. All those things were going through my mind as I was sitting in that information session. And, you know, yeah, and as someone who probably is, like, on the just not going to get the need based financially, but is not, like, extravagantly wealthy and cannot afford, like, money's no object for me,
A lot of
400,000
people are in that category, Lisa. I
Yeah,
don't qualify, but but the idea of stroking $100,000 checks not in the
I
plan
mean,
either.
yeah, I mean that's like, I don't even know how we would do that,
Hmm.
and what
Yeah.
we have to give up, like, food or something, so So it's just that really, I just think that people really need to think about that. Obviously, Washington University in St. Louis is more prestigious than the University of Missouri, right? But like there's not just the cost, right? Of the college, it's like what you have to do emotionally to pay that. And I was just talking to one of my psychotherapy clients this week, and she's a great person. Like she's a great mom. She's just fantastic. I love working with her.
Mm-hmm.
And she started talking about her daughter's Parent Plus loans have come due and she can't pay
Yeah,
them.
that's not a joke.
How much did you borrow? And she said $200,000.
Yeah.
And to put these girls through school. And I mean, they're great girls. One of them is like a costume designer. And a lot of times she's in between gigs because that's not a solid gig. The other one is, a therapist. We all know they don't make a ton of money, right off the bat. So, I mean, the girls really can't afford to help her with it. And, she's just kind of staring down the barrel of this and saying, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And she's 59 years old. And she would love to retire. She's not a big fan of her job, but it cannot happen. And she's like, I'm going to die before I pay all these off. And, with the compound interest, I think that's, I didn't even ask her like how the total was going up. And that, just the distress that really stuck with me. And that's not the only time that people have come to therapy because of problems paying their student debt, their student loan debt. I've seen it ruin lives, where people they didn't graduate from that school. They have all this loan debt. They can't get a house. They, can't go back to school and try to, finish because they can't afford it. They can't get a high paying job that would cover it. And, that is a very difficult situation that a lot of young people, and I would say like people in their 30s, I find to be, the ones that are struggling with that. And it just breaks my heart, to see that.
This is one reason I despise Parent Plus loans. They are not eligible for the SAVE income-based repayment plan or for the pay-as-you-earn income-based plan or the IBR income-based payment plan. They have high origination fees. They have no grace period. They are not forgivable in bankruptcy, and you can borrow up to the cost of attendance, which gets some parents in a lot of trouble. They're despicable, and if you need a Parent Plus loan to go to college, it is almost always a sign, in my opinion, that you're attempting to go to a college that is outside your budget, which is unadvisable. There are very few exceptions to this. Well, something kind of along those lines, and Lisa and I were talking about this when Lisa treated us to some nice munchies, but a beautiful view of her home. We had a meeting at her home, our team meeting at her home. It was lovely. It was awesome. She's got a great house. But we were talking about this a little bit. So when we moved to Atlanta, of course, my kids have been in independent schools all their lives, but there was a tuition perquisite that Susan and I both got. They called it the golden handcuffs. We only had to pay 10%, because we worked there, and the school covered 90% as a perk. So now I really like independent schools. I like the personal individual attention. The fact that you basically don't have the classroom disruption piece because you either screen for it on the front end on the admissions, and if you don't get your act together, then you got to go. So there's no classroom distractions, and you can find a place that's got a values match. And so, Westminster is the most prestigious school in Georgia. At one point, there were 47% national merit. So that tells you sort of the kind of kids they're attracting and all that, right? And so I'd known their director of admission for 20 years, Marjorie. And so when I was coming to Atlanta, I had a big event. It was at Westminster. And you should have seen the look on her face when I said, "Oh, we're not applying." She couldn't believe we weren't applying. And that this is not to indict someone who makes a different decision. But the reason I didn't want my kids to go there is because of a lot of the stuff you're talking about. What am I referring to? When I work in college counseling with kids that are at the most elite schools, and I work with a lot of those kids because those families really value education. A lot of times that's where I find the mindset that there's 30 good schools. And then that mindset that there's only 30 good schools leads to something that's very human and very natural, which is we all want to be respected. And so if kids kind of figure out, well, this is kind of how people keep score and this is how value is conferred, then people end up wanting to go to those 30 schools. And then that ends up leading to all kinds of crazy, in my opinion, sort of mental health issues that aren't in their best interest. And so, we picked a school that had really, really, really good academics, but it wasn't in the hoity-toity neighborhood, so it didn't have all that. I mean, you know, Georgia Tech has admission snapshots where they literally show the GPA from all the schools and your GPA in high school and your Georgia Tech GPA. The school my kids went to, the second highest GPA of all the schools in Atlanta freshman year at Georgia Tech, but it's not a cocktail party school. And it has a wide range of socioeconomic diversity. It's newer. A lot of times prestige comes from being old. It's newer. A lot of people don't know it. And we picked it over Westminster and a couple others, partly because I didn't want them to have to go through what I see so many of the kids I work with go through, which is I want to feel good about myself. I'm not going to feel good about myself if I don't go to one of these 25 or 30 schools. I don't know if I'm going to get in. It's stressing the heck of me. I don't want to be seen as a loser by those who I know.
Yeah.
That's some of what you're talking about, which is that peer pressure.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just so insidious, right, in our society. And I think it takes a lot of mental effort and discipline to try, to deliberately remove yourself from that. But I'm just telling people, like, it's not only going to cost you now if you make a decision that's based, it's if you have to go to WashU because they're the only ones that have the thing you want to study or you need, that's one thing. But if you just want to go there because it's more prestigious and it has better brand name recognition, but let's say you also got admitted to the University of Missouri and you got into the honors college and, maybe a special program in your major and there's all these opportunities and it's going to be much cheaper, then you might want to really consider the financial toll that's going to take on you and your family.
So, Lisa, I like the way you said that. You might want to consider because there's lots of different circumstances, right? Like WashU does give a decent number of full tuition scholarships away.
Absolutely.
So there might be someone that says, one, I'm going to go for one of those. Also, there are people that, like we all know this, 10 cents to a dime to somebody else is like $100 to somebody else. Like there's a lot of people in this country that have a lot of money. And there's some people for whom 100,000 is absolutely nothing. It really is. That's just nothing. So that's just completely a non-factor. And then there's also people whose grandparents have got it, like that's what I do. So every circumstance is different. But I like how you put that. You might want to consider.
Yeah.
And there's one other thing I want to say about this to reinforce your point. So one of the reasons I feel so strongly about the point you're making, a lot of the times when people pay that or they're willing to do that, they really think the majority of people, this is just my experience from the counseling room, they think that it's going to make that much a difference in the employment world. And I think we have to be really nuanced here. Certain professions do, like financial services, McKinsey, some of those management consulting positions, especially on the East Coast, some of the New York City banks, they do recruit from a smaller number of schools. But that is not the majority of jobs out there at all. And, I got a call from a listener. And, normally I don't answer random calls because it's like, it's always a solicitation or whatever. But this is like a regular listener. And she is over HR. She's been over HR at some of the highest level companies in this country. She reports directly to CEOs. And she wanted to follow up on the conversation that we had about college and is it worth it? Remember we had that? And she wanted to make the point that was a great point. A lot of times on the entry level stuff, not having a college degree, you may be okay. But if you look at who's getting, so you might get the $60,000 or $70,000, but you want to see who's getting like the $300,000 and $400,000. It's almost always somebody with a college degree. But the main reason I'm bringing this up now is we had a great conversation about what the public thinks matters and who gets a job is so misaligned with what actually matters. So I'm actually looking to have her come on the podcast because I think that's also where there's a disconnect. There is a disconnect. I've had lots of conversations over the years, and look, if you look for what employers look for, and this is a difficult conversation. I would never say name has no value at all, and I don't want to make this all about name. We're trying to kind of stay in the decision tree mode, but but your point is it's often peer pressure from society, from social media, from you know just like you said, all of the what's a good school and all the chatter that's out there versus not a good school. I find acceptance rates actually even has more power than rankings. If I have a school with a high acceptance rate, it's very difficult for me to convince people that it's a really good school, and they might have an unbelievable program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, we have a lot of misconceptions about the quality of colleges and what produces that and what indicates that, I think, as a culture. But my point is just to, if you're like my family, that you're probably not going to get much need-based aid. And you're in that situation, like, I don't know. I think it might be better to save like the $200,000. It would be a difference and invest it. Like, maybe in 6 years the kid would have $300,000.
Well, it's not even just, I'm into stock investing, but it's not even just that, it's also what you can even do educationally,
Right.
what you could do through international travel experiences and things, which are all part of what you can do through summer enrichment, which you can, like, I think people just need to think more that way on the financial, like look at what the business concept is called opportunity cost. So how do people resist these social pressures coming at them, Lisa? Because that's the $1 million question. Like, okay, you told me I had a problem. Yeah, that's like I came to the doctor and then the doctor spends 20 minutes saying, you know what, you're sick. Leave. I know I'm sick. I want to know what do I do about
No.
being sick?
Yeah. That's where I think really educating yourself and looking at cold, hard facts and data and comes to play. And that's the part I think that you would probably be shocked that, like, a touchy feely, psychologist would be telling you, yeah, I don't know about those feelings. Look at the numbers, but really look at the numbers, and not just the numbers of the cost, but the numbers of, like, when you look on LinkedIn and you see, like, what are the alumni from the computer science department at Mizzou doing now, and where do they work versus the WashU people? Is there a huge difference in that or their success level or not? And just to really think about the money, because at the end of the day, this is a consumer decision. It's a purchase. And you want to make a wise purchase, and you don't want to just buy, like, maybe there's two pairs of shoes that are the same, but one has, I don't know, even, I'm so out of it, I don't even know what a fancy brand name of shoes. Jimmy
You can always go with like Air Jordans and stay within the Jordan sneaks.
Yeah, I don't know, and the other is exactly the same, and you've paid 3 times the amount. I think that that might be okay for shoes because that's a smaller purchase, but this is a huge purchase for a family. And just to try to really be rational, because you're never going to see most of those people you went to high school with on a regular basis ever again. And if you're out of the school system, you're not going to see the parents aren't going to see the other parents that much. They're temporary. Your financial situation is your life. It's permanent.
Yeah, and once again, I would just want to come back to something I see over and over and over again. So, first students I started working with are now 39. They're about to be 40. And, I try to keep in touch with them the best that I can. And when I look at sort of who's really kind of crushed it, and a lot of these kids are crushing it, even by 25, 26, I can't even believe the things they're doing. I look back at them and they're not necessarily the kids that had the highest test scores or went to the prestigious schools. They're
Yeah.
really not. But you know what? They have a certain skill set. Here's what I will say. They almost all have. They were hardworking and highly motivated. They built relationships well. Like, they were good networkers. They had good communication skills. They have high levels of personal integrity. They are resilient. They get back up when they get knocked down. And they chose to do something that they were good at and that they loved.
Right.
And that's what I see. And they can go to a regional public school. They could go to a nondescript private school with low name recognition. Start at a community college. There's so many different educational paths. And once you get in, for the majority of jobs out there, it's not very long before you're out of college when the fancy sheepskin loses its luster, and it's what have you done? What have you done? Like, well, you're 28 now. What have you done in the 6 years you've been out? And when I talk to your recommenders, what are they going to say about you? And when I bring you in, do you crush the interview? Do you, convince everybody that you meet? You're going to be an addition. You're going to be a great addition to our company. And it's just really different. One of my biggest problems with the obsession of people having to go brand name is it just doesn't line up with the reality of how most of the world works for most of the jobs. Now, there's a family for whom this is challenging for me because what matters to them is the cocktail party. What matters to them is the bumper sticker. That's what matters. And that's a lot harder for me because I don't really know what to do with that. However, there's another very, very, very sizable group who are focused on that because they're so, I mean, let's face it, we love our kids and we want what's best for our kids. There's another group that are so convinced that my kid is going to be on this completely different career trajectory if they go to XYZ school versus this school. And that's the one that I will challenge. But like I said, there is some nuance, There's a few
Yeah.
professions that are name conscious. There's also certain parts of the country that are more than others. But it's the misalignment with this value set and the way the world actually works.
Right. And that's where like your brain is altering reality, right? To
Yes.
fit with what the common opinion is. Because I mean, anyone, if they actually look at this, the actual facts, I mean, that is, I think, the pretty obvious conclusion. And frankly, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that you are better off psychologically and professionally if you go someplace where you're like more in one of the top students of that school rather than you're in the bottom third or, fourth, because if you're always fighting for grades and you're struggling, that's going to do a number on your self-esteem, whereas the other kid, who's like, just killing it at that particular school feels great about themselves and that carries over into everything that they do.
You know what, Lisa, I was just thinking about this. For those of you who are new, and maybe it's your first, second, or third time listening to this, you may not know this, but, Lisa has degrees from Chicago, doctorate from Northwestern, and then she did 2 years of postdoc at University of Michigan. So those are all three schools that are the schools people are trying to bang the doors down to get into. So I think you have a certain degree of leverage and platform when you speak. When I went and watched the Dream School documentary that we both love, that we've referred to everybody. If you haven't watched Dream School, go to YouTube, put in Dream School PBS. It's only 56 minutes. And I watched it again with my kids when I was in Durham. And one of the things I really like, because there is an educational consultant in there that I want to say she has degrees from Harvard and Penn. And she says to all of her clients, so many people that I went to school with are not successful. They're not.
Absolutely.
If the degree did all of this for them, then all these people would be successful. So stop thinking where you go to school is some elixir. And a lot of people I find think that way. A lot of people think this degree is so magical. It just opens up all kinds of doors. And it's more on you and your skill set and your character.
Well, and no matter what degree you have, you still have to work hard and you have to hustle. I mean, I know in my career, nobody asked me where I went to school anymore, but like even if they did, it wouldn't do anything for me. I had to, as a
And you have to be good at
psychologist.
relationships, right? If
Yeah,
you were terrible at relationships, it would, like, all your degrees would not work for anything because so many jobs involve relationship building.
right.
And I don't see parents putting the focus on relationship building, communication skills, some of the character things, not because just because their society, I think, just pressures people.
Yeah, it's like there's only one path, one way to go, 30 schools. That's just not true. And, there are so many people who have so many great talents that no school is ever going to give them an A for and don't show up on the SAT. And you're going to watch those people are going to be incredibly successful as adults, regardless of where they go to school. When we did our tour of Mizzou, we spent a lot of time at their business school, which I think they're trying to promote a little bit more. And, we met with a student and he was from a small town in Missouri and he was a second year in the program. He was in their honors program. He'd already traveled like internationally 3 times. He had 2 internships. He struggled in his first, he's an accounting major. He struggled in his first accounting class. So he talked to the professor and they went over everything. I mean, and that is the thing I would say that is truly special. I think about Mizzou is if you have a problem, they are going to try to help you, even though they're a big state school in sort of a personalized way. If that kid went to WashU, and he probably could have, he seemed like a really smart kid. He probably would, might have even been affordable depending on his family's finances. I don't know if he'd get all those opportunities. He'd be elbowing it out with everybody else. It makes you think.
Well, you may remember recently I recommended Brennan Barnard's interview with Dr. Lisa Lamore. By the way, she has a podcast called Ask Lisa. I'm like, hey, that should be you.
Yeah, we'll talk about that whole thing another time.
Yeah. But one thing I loved in that interview is she said she was on the faculty of Michigan and it was so hard to get access to, opportunities. And then she went to a little nondescript school in Ohio that no one had even heard of. And the opportunities that were there for students was unbelievable.
Yeah.
And she was making that point. Like, here's the big brand name school, and it's much, much, much harder to get certain opportunities there than it is at the smaller environment. And, my favorite classes in college were social psychology and sociology. And one thing I remember is just studying group behavior, and especially like when you see things like uprisings and stuff where people take on the collective conscious of the group. It's kind of what you're talking about. And then they start doing things that they almost like an outer body experience that they would never do, but they feel emboldened and empowered because the group is all doing this. And I think that's one of the things that's driving the insanity. And it's not just on the student level, it's also on the parent level, because we'll meet with parents and they're like, do I really need to pay all this money, or does my kid need to start specializing in something in the 7th grade, or pay $13,000 to go to the University of Chicago for 6 weeks in the summer? Is that what I need to do? And you literally can see, I'm drawing from the counseling room. You literally can see parents saying, that would be so onerous for me to do that. And I don't want to do it, but if that's what I have to do to get my kid ahead, I'll do it. And you can just see the pressure they're feeling. Like, am I hurting my kid by not doing all these things?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really hard. And even like the difference between Lisa Ruff and Lisa D'Amour is just brand name, because I'm telling you, I say all the same things that she does, and I've been saying it for
well,
30
I believe
years.
That.
And nobody like reads my book. Of course I haven't.
That's because you haven't written it yet.
But the Lisas, I personally think, like, it's funny because if I say it, everyone says, that's nice. If she says it, they're like, oh, that's so profound.
That's not necessarily true. This is your platform to do your thing.
Yeah. But, that being said, she's absolutely right. And that's, I think, the thing that people don't always think about. So it's just try to separate yourself from the group, because the group isn't paying your college bill. It's you, it's your family. And make the decision that's best for your family,
And I know you've come at a lot of it from the financial angle, and I get it. You're just coming off of a tour, and I think that's really, really important. But to me, it's a lot more than just that, right? It's what environment is going to be best for you mentally, what environment's going to lead to the best opportunities. And I don't want this to be an anti-selective, anti-prestigious school either, because a lot of times those schools are amazing. And if you can afford it, that can be incredible. But it's sort of this reflexive reaction, non-thinking reaction that school A is always better than school B. And to the point where people don't even want to investigate. Like, you want to know one of my pet peeves, Lisa knows this. We work really, really, really hard. We have this like 170 questionnaire that we have between students and parents, and we go do all this research. And we're thinking of all of these components of matching. And we roll out a college list for someone. And then the next day, or they say, oh, I took all these off. And they didn't research. They just strictly went by their perception of a name. That's kind of the stuff you're talking about as well. That like reflexive reaction rather than You know what I love is someone that says, I really like that you surface schools that I didn't even know. And I especially like when they say, I haven't even heard of some of these schools. And I think that's great. Versus if it was any good, I would know it.
Right. Right. And I've had like a number of clients this year say like, well, my kid really likes school X, and I see that it would be a good fit for them because it has all these resources. But they also got into school Y. It's more prestigious. What should I do? And I just finally would say like the school that you should go to is one you think you're the most likely to graduate from, because there's no point otherwise of doing it at all.
And I would add, have a great college experience.
Right.
Because high achieving kids are going to graduate no matter where. They can go to school at 2% graduation rate. But, what's going to give you the best experience and what's going to prepare you for what your next step in life is. And don't just reflexively think it's the more selective school.
Yeah. Because ultimately, I think that, the college admissions industry is crazy making, overpriced, coming at parents, taking advantage of them for all kinds of angles. And the only way that we're going to get out of that is to vote with our wallets, right? And do what is in, the best interest of the student that is also, in the best interest of your finances. And I think a lot of times you can combine those things quite nicely.
You absolutely can, because what Lisa and I know is that so many schools won't charge you a fraction of what their sticker price is, what you actually are going to pay. That's on the financial side. It's challenging though, Lisa, because here's the thing, and I've been thinking about this a lot. In a lot of ways, prestige kind of makes the world go around, right? Like people pick professions off of prestige. They choose to live in certain neighborhoods. They'll pay more money to say they're in certain zip codes. They'll pay more money for a certain car to make a certain kind of impression, or have a certain purse, or wear certain clothes. So some of it is just people want to be respected by others. And some of it just goes to the heart of human nature. And so and I'm okay with telling people prestige can be a component of your evaluation. I just don't like it when it's the only thing.
Mhm. Well, that's capitalism for you, right? In capitalism, we're not happy because we always have to earn money to go buy that next thing that somebody wants us to buy so they can earn money. And we're never happy. Like it never ends. Like rich people, like you see like these incredibly rich people, they're trying to get richer still. And you're like, you're so rich, it doesn't even matter anymore. But that's just, I think that is human nature. I don't know if we always have to just go with that. I think we also, as humans, have the ability to override our base nature and make rational and decisions about how we want to behave and how we want to live.
I mean, I definitely feel, like I said, when I see people that are preoccupied by name, the majority of the time it's because they think that name is going to give their kids so much more of an advantage. And so one way of counteracting that a lot of times is data. When you can have really good outcomes data from other places. And that's always the test. If I can show incredible outcomes data, a lot of times, for example, let's say I'm working with a pretty strong kid and I say Santa Clara University. They may or may not be impressed with that. Sometimes, well, I thought I could go to a better brand than Santa Clara University. They have the 8th highest starting salary.
Oh,
I
I
mean, look
think
where they're
that's
located.
phenomenal.
Do you know how many companies? Do you know how many? And they also have super, super high 4-year grad rate
Mm-hmm.
and a gorgeous campus.
Yeah.
So they don't, and I'm not saying they're for everybody because I believe in what'd you say, Lisa?
That's not slumming it at Santa Clara University,
Yeah, but it's like, it's just one example. I don't know. It's a challenge doing what we do to come up with ways to meet people where they're at, because they're coming in with all kinds of messages telling them my life will be better if I go here.
Yeah.
And here's another piece that they don't understand. And I don't think enough people think about this. Sometimes when you overmatch, and that's kind of an admissions term for getting in a school where you're sort of punching above your weight class, where most of the kids are probably stronger than you, the toll it takes on your mental health, well, it goes back to what you said about being the bigger fish. Like, that's not, a lot of times those environments are just not healthy.
No.
And they're not healthy. and they don't produce the outcomes that people thought they would produce. I'm going to give an example, and I don't want to be critical of any school, but in the boarding school world, the most prestigious school is Phillips Exeter. It's the most prestigious boarding school. And I've said something for years, and it would freak people out. I'd say for every 4 kids I work with that gets into Exeter, it's probably only the right school for 1 out of 4. And I've worked with, over the years, lots of kids that have gone there. And I'm helping some families there now. But that place is so grueling. The level of intensity, the way 14-year-olds are expected to be 18 or 19-year-olds, most kids, it's just not best for them. But people get sucked in because it's Phillips Exeter. And then they have all kinds of mental health issues. Not all of them, because I've had people go there and they would do it all over again. And then even college admissions. I also had people that go there and they're in the middle of the class and they don't have the options that they would have had if they would have gone somewhere else and been toward the top of the class.
Yeah. I mean, that's where it's like, as a consumer, it pays to do your due diligence and really look at the research. But also, remember, we live in a capitalist society and everyone's trying to sell us everything all the time. And, you have to protect yourself from that, I think. Because sometimes I wonder, for most kids who aren't going to get into those top 30 schools, even though they're awesome students and they have good test scores, but their extracurriculars are not like national or whatever, or they don't have family connections. Like sometimes I wonder, why are they even applying? Like this is just, so much stress. You could just skip it.
But I think here's the piece I think that you get, Lisa. You know how hard it is to actually get into there.
Right.
So a lot of people really don't know. And so so you know what I mean? And and this is always a difficult conversation because there's plenty of our listeners that can get into these places, do get in, send us emails that said they got in. We get it all the time. So I don't want everyone out. I mean, it's hard to talk about this and not dissuade the person that should be applying. But,
right.
But there's a kid, and you and I can see it because we've been doing this, that's just not realistic for them to get in. And also, if they were to get in, it probably wouldn't be the best experience because they'd be in over their head. I've shared this once before on the podcast, but when I spent a week of training out at Stanford in 2019, one of the admission officers on the team, she got her bachelor's and her master's in there. And she said, Mark, I came in with 8 friends, 9 counting me, that wanted to be doctors. Only one of us made it. And I sometimes think, if we weren't at Stanford, how many of us would have been doctors?
Mm-hmm. True.
I see that a lot, to be honest.
Yeah. I'll just close with, I did have a little proud parenting moment at SACHAC because I ran into my daughter's college counselor in the hall.
Did she attend your session?
Oh, yeah. And it was super awkward because it was about dealing with difficult parents. And I'm like, oh, this is very awkward, very awkward. But anyway, we were talking about my daughter and, I was like, I feel like this is going to be not so tough, because she's relatively new in her role. And she's like, oh, I had this great conversation with your daughter where she's like, I don't want to go to any of those. I just want to go to a school that I can really learn well, get good grades, get my opportunities so I can apply to law school. And I don't care about prestige. I just care about what's at the school. And I was like, oh, someone was listening to me in my house. Now we'll see if that keeps up. That could have just been a moment of weakness on my daughter's part. But I really do believe that, and so I just think it can be done. And, my daughter is in a pretty prestige conscious situation there at a private school, but somehow we've maybe inoculated her against it a little bit.
You can, with good parenting and conveying your values and what you teach is important. It's very important because kids can tell what parents believe. Parents, kids can tell what you believe, not what you say, what you believe. So if you are really going to be disappointed if your kid doesn't get into brand name U, trust me, your kid already knows that. You can't just tell them you don't care where they go to college. They know what you really believe. This is what you believe, Lisa. You've said things. When we did Marquette, you said, I'd be happy for my kid to go to Marquette,
I certainly would. It won't because it's too cold.
Yeah, and Elon, which we know is a hidden gem, you didn't look at it and say they admit 80% is not a good school. You're able to see the quality at Elon. So you've sort of walked that and proven that by your decision. So you've reflected those values. And one of the reasons why I am so passionate about this topic is because I want kids to feel better about themselves. And when I see kids go down this path of I have to get into one of these schools and I'm going to judge myself as successful
Yes.
or not, and especially if I see that you're not someone that I see getting into those schools, that's a train wreck that's on a way to happen. I'm going to try to stop that train wreck.
Yeah.
I think I might have said this on the podcast once before, but I had a conversation with one of my students who's at a pretty hoity-toity school. And she's like, Mark, this process takes a toll on your self-esteem. It does. And I'm like, well, it doesn't have to. She says, yeah, it does. And I'm like, no, it's because of the mindset of I need to go to Princeton or whatever, right? That's where that comes. And honestly, the single biggest reason why I'm so passionate about this topic, one is because it's not how I believe the world actually works. So I think people are putting too much emphasis on the wrong things. But as I want kids to feel, I think self-esteem is really important. I think self-confidence is really important. And I want kids to come out feeling successful and not feeling beaten down. And you can absolutely put yourself in a position where you have ghosts in your mind for the rest of your life or for a very long time. I guess I'm not smart. I didn't get in at, this, the other, only because you didn't apply well.
Right. And, and there's a freedom to stepping out of it too. Like, my daughter's an anxious person, but I don't think she's anxious about going to college, and that allows her to be anxious about all the other things that she's anxious about. It like frees up space for that, I guess. But there's a freedom to feel like, I don't, so she gets a B. Oh, well,
Yeah.
it's just, it makes life a lot easier, people. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
if you can just let
Awesome.
it go.
Let's close with that. That was good stuff. Thank you, Lisa. This is
All right.
great. Nice final, the icing on the cake for a three-parter. And just so you know, everyone, we're going to put all of this together as one big giant sort of part 1, part 2, part 3, and put it up on our website. So thank you.
I'm happy to be the icing. The icing is my favorite part of it.
I'm a sweet tooth, so I like icing.
I will just eat icing and not. So that's an honor to be called icing. So thank you.
That is. It's not a cool name. Your new nickname, icing.
Icing. Quite appropriate. So.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in the final part of what's a 3-part interview with Lynda Depker and Marjorie Betley, Executive Director of the Stars College Network, Marjorie talks about her own adjustment from a rural school to the University of Chicago. Marjorie talks about the mentorship and peer-to-peer support that is available for students once they get to campus. Marjorie talks about the very creative Bridging the Divide program that is run through the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. Marjorie and Lynda talk about the skepticism rural students increasingly have about the value of college. Marjorie talks about an outstanding program Northwestern is offering for rural students. Marjorie gives her advice for rural students, rural parents, and working with rural students. Marjorie shares where students can learn more about STARS. And finally, Marjorie goes on the hot seat for our lightning round. Listen and enjoy.
You have touched on a lot of things there. And first, dual enrollment. This comes up all the time in rural schools because they see it as the gold standard. And it can be tough because those credits don't always transfer. They don't always transfer within your own state, let alone to out-of-state schools. So I always caution students about, if you have an option between dual enrollment or an AP class, AP credits are more likely to be recognized and accepted. And then they're not always accepted for credit. So something to keep an eye on. And then when you're and I agree, Khan and Schoolhouse, terrific resources. But you mentioned having a curated curriculum going back to 8th grade. And most rural students aren't thinking about college in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, maybe, in the spring of 11th grade, when they see where their senior friends are going to school, maybe it starts to kick in. And so that is something that I hope that the counselors start to realize, that these are conversations that should happen earlier, because if you wait to deal with calculus in your senior year, it's too late. You need time to go through that process. So wonderful resources there. What happens with these students when they arrive on campus? And do the schools and the network provide resources? I know Chicago does, but what does that look like at other schools? Because it can be a culture shock if you're going from, a small school with, maybe 10 in your high school class to Ohio State University. That's, mammoth. Or you're all of a sudden you're dealing with socioeconomic differences. That can be a shock as well.
Absolutely. That is something that I've experienced as a student coming from a really small town to the third largest city in the United States. There are lots of shocks that can happen in terms of population density, public transportation. You're going to be kind of thrown into a mix of people from everywhere, from every state, and at University of Chicago, over 100 different countries. There's a lot to adapt to. I'll use U Chicago as a little bit of example, but a few of our other partner schools I think are doing some really wonderful things. But mentorship programs are a big part, I think, of creating that relationship and making that transition a little bit easier. Peer-to-peer mentorship specifically. That is something that I think it's incredibly helpful to have someone a few years older than you, but close enough to say, I have been in your shoes. I know how it feels. We're piloting a new mentorship program called Ed2 Dream, basically is what it's called. And then the University of Chicago has its own mentorship program that is for all students, not just rural, but we're really piloting like a smaller one just for rural students. Peer-to-peer mentorship. I mentioned kind of like the one-on-one mentorship programs, but then also the rural student alliances that we've seen pop up at a lot of different institutions. That is a space made for and by rural students, and I think that is really important. We have one at the University of Chicago, but also our partners at Yale have had one for many years. Partners at Columbia and Brown have had these rural student alliances for years. WashU has a really robust kind of mentorship and peer-to-peer support system. We see that as a really great resource. And sometimes it does require the institution itself to step in and say, we will give you startup money until you are ready to, kind of get out there on your own feet and apply for RSO status or do this or do that. And part of that's because we know from the point of entry, like we have a lot of rural students coming. This could be a really good support system. Let's make sure that it's available for them once they get here, and that they know about it. I think that's the big thing too. Some of these schools, like you mentioned, OSU, massive. Making sure that every student knows what their resources are, I can't imagine. But I do know on our end, as a smaller institution, it's a lot easier for us to build those relationships earlier on and be able to say, hey, we're happy to have you on campus. Here's this. So I would say those are good. One thing that we're doing uniquely at the University of Chicago that I don't think any of our peers are yet it's called the Bridging the Divide program. It is run through the Institute of Politics here, but it's been around for 4 or 5 years. And what it does is it brings a cohort of students from the University of Chicago, a cohort of students from a small Christian school in Southern Illinois, and a cohort of students from a 2-year community college on the north side of Chicago. And you put them in a room and you give them some really tough questions to answer. And it's a great week. They learn a lot about each other. They realize they have more in common than they might have known. They had a lot of assumptions. They had a lot of thoughts. And they talk about things like opioid addiction. They talk about immigration. They talk about like some really heavy stuff. And I think that's something that many institutions are missing sometimes, is the opportunity for a conversation that is with someone very, very different from you, and just being willing to have that conversation. So Bridging the Divide this year is going to be a conference, which is designed to help facilitate discussions and conversations between, rural America and urban America. That's the divide that they're attempting to bridge there. And I think that's something that there needs to be more conversations, because the more we kind of sit in our own echo chambers, the less we understand about other people. So yeah, that's something that I think is really important. We also have many of the different institutions will have bridge programs, and those are designed to give students extra time on campus before the school year starts. That can be a really good way, especially at a larger institution. And I know a lot of our publics have these programs where you spend a couple weeks before the rush of the other couple tens of thousands of people show up on campus, to get your feet under you, to learn how to navigate the campus, to learn how to navigate extra resources. For us at UChicago, they learn how to navigate public transportation. They learn how to get around the city. And then everyone else comes in September. But you've had a few extra weeks to kind of really feel comfortable and learn how to navigate things before it gets really overwhelming.
And that's a terrific program. But at UChicago, I think that's a competitive program.
The CAP program,
Yeah.
yes, it does not accommodate as many students as we would want, but we do have a new dean of students that we're really excited about. And we're hoping to almost double that program, because there are a lot of students who would benefit from that sort of experience. To be honest, a lot of our emerging rural leaders get that experience during their summer here, which is great. But if they haven't had a summer on campus or time to do that, then they can get it during the summer before classes start.
Yeah. And the IOP program, is it Eureka College that you work with?
Yes, Eureka College.
Yeah. And I just know that because my daughter actually did, I think it was a quiz bowl camp at Eureka College.
Oh my goodness.
And rural, it is definitely in a rural area. So I can see that. And some of what you're talking about, that Bridging the Gap program, one of the things that I see more often than I would like is the declining respect for higher education in rural areas. So when you go and you visit these rural schools, are you hearing that? I know that you're getting students who are like, I've never heard of UChicago. I've never heard of Colby, and so how do you combat that when you're talking to these rural areas?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of distrust or misinformation and myths, I would say, about higher education in general, but especially about certain institutions, right? I've had that question asked me directly, right? I was in a small town in Idaho, and I had a dad of a student walk up to me and says, "Why are you here?" We do not want you here, was the follow-up there. And I have definitely come to understand there are areas that are more remote on purpose. There are communities that have decided this is we would prefer to not interact with the outside world. That's not the majority of rural areas that I deal with. The majority of rural areas that I deal with are actually like pretty open to the idea. They just feel like they have been overlooked for a long time, and that they don't want their student to end up in debt. They don't want their student to end up leaving and never coming back. Like there's a lot of fear and honestly justified in some ways, right? If you think that that sticker price is what everyone's going to pay, absolutely, I would be terrified of sending my kid to college. If you think that your student's going to leave and never return, absolutely, you'd be terrified to send them off to college. So yeah, there are lots of different ways that that kind of works. And I found that just sharing the information that we have, the resources, the opportunities, and really addressing a lot of the fears or the myths, right? Brain drain being one of the big ones that we drilled down on when we started our work as well, was this idea of as an institution, I do not want to swoop in and take your best and brightest out of your community and you will never see them again. That does nothing for rural America. It does not help that community. It does not help that economy. It does nothing. And so that is not our goal in any way, shape, or form. We're actually actively trying to give students opportunities to return. IOP actually has a new program, same thing. It's called the Hometown Internships Program. We offer remote internships so students can go home over the summer. We offer a really wide variety. Northwestern's doing some really cool stuff in this area, actually. They are doing a program specifically for rural students that's going to focus on entrepreneurship and engineering, that students can go and take this back to their hometowns and start their own companies and get things going. Like that does so much more. I think what we're running into is, for a long time, it has seemed like a one-way road. And it has not been a two-way partnership at all. It hasn't been a healthy ecosystem. There has been a brain drain. There has been distrust. So what we are trying to do is make that much more mutually beneficial and much more of a healthier ecosystem where we create relationships instead of swooping in and taking students, and we give students opportunities to return and give back to their community in some way. And that's in the long run for everyone is going to be a much better.
Yeah. Yeah. I can tell you've had this conversation before, because those are definitely some of the hot topics. And yeah, I just think that a lot of rural students, families, and high schools don't know what they don't know. Meets need at some of these colleges can be just life-changing. So I just want to say thank you, first of all, for all of your time. But I have a couple more questions. What advice do you have for rural students, their parents, and then the high school counselors or college counselors actually working with those students?
Yeah, I think, and this is something I say a lot. I also say that you don't know what you don't know, but my other biggest piece of advice would be just keep an open mind. And it's not always a nice, like, straight line from point A to point B. So that is something, every part of this process, whether it's the college search process, college itself, whatever happens after, for students especially, I try to explain, it can be very curvy and topsy-turvy, and it may not look like the easy point A to point B, but every part along the way is a really important experience. It's a skill that you're learning. It's building kind of you and your skill set and your character and everything like that. And because I run into a lot of students who say, well, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go, I'm going to graduate from high school. I'm going to be a nurse. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to this school and I'm going to go with my friend. And it's going to be great. And it doesn't always work that way. So I think it's okay to keep an open mind, to embrace the process, because it's not always black and white. It's not always clear cut. It can be very gray sometimes. And I think the other part that I think is important is to advocate for yourself. So don't be afraid to say, this is what I want. Have conversations, obviously, about that with family and everything like that. But I've had a couple of recent conversations with students who said, well, I did this because my parents want me to do it, or because that's always what I was going to do. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself and say, well, this is what I want to do. This is what I think is best for me, because at the end of the day, you do know yourself well. If you take your time to get to know yourself, you do. So embrace the process, keep an open mind. Don't forget to advocate for yourself. I think those are big things. For counselors, I would say please lean on us as resources. I think that's something I talk to counselors all the time, and I'll offer them. I'm like, hey, do you want me to come visit your high school? And they're like, oh, I didn't know that was an option. I will do Zoom webinars. We'll come visit you. We want to be good partners. We want to do more for the ecosystem that I talk about, and we're in this one little part of the ecosystem. So please lean on us, use our resources, use our expertise. That's what we're here for. So
Great. Now, speaking of leaning on you, where can families and counselors and students find out more about the Stars College Network?
yeah, so our website is starscollegenetwork.org. Let me double check that, because that sounds right to me. And everything, one of the things that we wanted to do with this, yes, is create just a one-stop shop. So all of the summer programs that are available this summer that are fully funded, they're on this website. You have fully funded opportunities at Yale and Vanderbilt, Colby, UChicago, WashU. There's a bunch of stuff on there. And we keep updating it with other opportunities as they come up. The virtual webinars are on there. There's a separate page for counselors. If counselors want to sign up to be on our mailing list, we do counselor Q&As. We do different workshops. And then we're in the process of adding a little blurb at the end of that sign up that says, would you like a Stars school to come visit you? So you can indicate your interest on there too as a counselor.
Terrific. Well, nobody gets off their first time on the YCBK podcast without some hot seat questions. So brace yourself.
Awesome.
So tell me, what destination is on your bucket list? You want to escape the gray Chicago weather in February. Get rid of the lake effect snow. Where are you going?
It's been on my bucket list for a long time. New Zealand is really one of those places that I desperately want to go. Australia as well. And I would love to go visit. It's the kind of place that I don't know if I want to live. I've seen the huntsman spiders. I've seen the critters. Not my favorite, but I would love to go visit.
I'm with you on that spider thing. Let's talk about why I left Florida. It was because of the bugs. What is your go-to favorite snack to binge? Like, no pounds will be gained, but no guilt. So you don't have to share with the kids. You can just binge away. What's your favorite snack?
I actually binged them last night for Valentine's Day, but it's the Trader Joe's dark chocolate peanut butter cups.
They're
Could
the
have
best.
them all day. All day. I love them so much.
They are absolutely the best. Thank goodness there's no Trader Joe's within a 45-mile radius of me.
You're safe.
Yeah. And tell me, what would be your dream job that's not education related, paycheck, no concern? What do you dream about?
This is going to sound probably boring, but I would love to work at a library. That's kind of something that I just think sounds wonderful and relaxing and enjoyable and rewarding and all those things that we do love about education, but a very different part of that. So,
Marjorie, the next time I'm in Chicago, you and we're going to go to Plein Air or one of those 14 coffee shops and have coffee, then go over to Mansueto, which is my favorite place on Chicago's campus.
Yeah.
And we're just going to hang out and plan a trip to New Zealand.
Sounds lovely.
Marjorie, thank you so much. I have been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. Thank you for helping rural students realize that schools like UChicago and MIT and Yale are possibilities, and that there's a map to get from there to there. I just so appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Lynda, for having me. This was lovely.
On Thursday's episode, part 2, Vince and I continue our discussion of an article that appeared in the New York Times by guest essayist entitled, Elite College Admissions Have Turned Students into Brands. Our speak pipe question is a multiple questions from Lee from Northern California. And Julie and I will answer these 3 questions. They all have to do with how do colleges differentiate students when there's so much grade inflation out there. Now, there's no college spotlight for this week, but you're getting a double interview this week. And then you'll get double spotlights for the next 2 weeks. It's just kind of how the production calendar worked out. So the first interview is a great interview Lisa did with Jeremy Lowe from American University. He's the assistant vice provost, and they have a conversation about direct admissions. Where's this going? And what is it? The following 2 weeks, Jeremy will do a spotlight of American University in Washington, D.C. A request we had some time ago, by the way, from a listener. Our second interview was with Chris Cage. He's the VP of Enrollment at Belmont University. His interview this week will be on why go to college. And then the following 2 weeks, he'll do a spotlight on Belmont University, another request we had from a listener to spotlight Belmont University. And friends, I close with something Andy Strickler shared in our 1-hour Q&A on Zoom this Wednesday. He talked about 35 years ago. He'll never forget the elation, the jubilation, the exuberance that his mom had when she ran out the door. Like he said, it was like she won the lottery. And what was causing such ecstasy? He got admitted to Earlham College, a school he knew nothing about. He grew up in Radnor, Pennsylvania, suburban Philly, in this small little 1,000-person school in Richmond, Indiana, caused such jubilation. And the reason I wanted to share that story with you is kids never, ever stop trying to make their parents proud of them. But how you respond as a parent to your students' acceptances can be indelibly etched on their minds and in their subconscious 35 years later. And it can buoy and bolster their self-esteem. So friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. But it's what you do when you get there, and it's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career trajectory. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Lynda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Matvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Lynda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.